ahead as they work to ensure that space continues advancing to benefit all aspects and corners of humanity. So thank you in advance to our panelists. Thank you so much to our audience for spending so much time with us today. And again, what is an extraordinarily busy week in an extraordinarily exciting space. And please join me in welcoming to the podium His Excellency, Dr. Ahmed Belhaou Al-Fulaisi, UAE Minister for Sports, which I have some questions about that portfolio, in addition to his role as the chairman of the UAE Space Agency for opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good afternoon. And I'll answer the question, Graham, about the link between sports and space in a bit. What a week. I think I'd like to first commend the US and NASA for their leadership. We just attended today a briefing about the laser-focused direction towards going back to the lunar surface. And I think we got the invitations a few days back. And we flew in here and we saw that all our partners came in. It was such an important historical moment to show that leadership is really required to achieve such an incredible task. We're talking about sustainable human presence on the lunar surface. And I think this day will be remembered in the next 5 to 10 years. That was a pivotal moment where we all convened together in a multilateral way to achieve one goal for humanity. But let me take a step back first and talk about why are we here as a UAE in space. We're a young country, and we entered space pretty late. For us, when we entered space, as you know, space has 3 subsectors. First one is communications, and then you have Earth observation, where you can monitor the Earth, and the third one is space exploration. So it's an easier sell always, as an official, to get into comms, because communication is profitable. And our first business was 3 decades ago, a company called Thuraya that provides satellite communication that covers predominantly areas that are not well connected, like Africa and other countries. That was highly profitable. So that was how we entered space in the beginning. The second sector, which is remote sensing, was more so from an environmental and security angle, where you'd like to understand, where does the oil spillage, if it happens, how can you monitor it? How can you monitor your borders? And therefore, from a sovereign perspective, there was also emphasis on developing our capability in remote sensing. It was an easier sell as well back home. Now, the challenge is when you talk about space exploration. How can you sell funding for something that does not have a direct return on investment that you can quantify and measure directly at a country level? But for us at the time when I was appointed, going back to Graham's question, about 10 years ago, I was the Minister for Higher Education, and I was appointed as the chairman of the space agency. As with anything, we've entered education quite late. So my father was one of the first people who went to school, like proper formal school, and therefore we're still playing catch up. If you look at our scores globally and the assessments called SIMS and PISA, we have always ranked lower than other countries. So the question was, how can we really ignite interest, curiosity in subjects like STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? And we looked no further than the US. We saw what happened with the Apollo mission. We saw a clear impact of launching a very nationalistic project that created a huge interest from as young as kids in kindergarten all the way to PhD for people who are interested in STEM, and also, more importantly, women in STEM. And we did that. So we announced our first mission to Mars about 10 years ago. And after we launched the mission in 2021, 2020, we measured the improvement in the number of students that are signed up for STEM subjects, and it increased dramatically, over a third. Women in STEM also increased dramatically as well. And beyond that, the number of students that are studying postgraduate studies, master's and PhD, has also increased. So for us, purely from a national angle, space exploration for us was a real catalyst to create interest in science and technology. Now, not everyone went into space, but we've got a really big base of engineers and scientists and mathematicians who are able to feed later into other aspects like AI and other sectors as well. And beyond that as well, for us, the multilateral part was very important. So when we talk about human space travel with our astronauts, we worked very closely with the US, with ESA in Europe, with Russia as well as Cosmos. So we really were able to put the UAE on the map to become an important player. And today we're talking about Artemis, where the UAE has signed up for a big chunk of that project, where we work with all other countries collaboratively to be able to achieve a bigger goal for humanity. So to your point about sports, again, I was the chairman when I was the Minister for Education for 4 years. Once we launched the mission, we appointed Excellency Sarah Amir to become the chairperson. Then I was appointed back in, but I was the Minister of Sports back then. So I still need to figure out a way to link the two. So we find a sport that we can play over the surface of the moon. But as of yet, again, always happy to be here at the Atlantic Council. And again, the team here is to answer your questions. We're open here for business across all different sectors, communications, remote sensing, and space exploration. So again, I wish you all the best, and I'm sure the team here have a lot of questions and a lot of insights to give you. So thank you for listening, and hopefully all a good session. Thank you so much.
All the way down. So I have a frame for this discussion, but you all have it on the internet, so I'm just going to go into questions. So first and foremost, welcome to our first panelists. The title of this discussion is Space Leaders on the Missions, Ambitions, and Decisions Shaping Our Future, which thanks to our staff for making that rhyme. First and foremost, welcome to Adnan Al-Rais, Assistant Director General for Space Operations and Exploration Sector at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center. And to Alexander Suchek, Head of External Relations, European Space Agency. Let's go right into questions. And if you all have any questions about the frame for this session, then again, you can Google it. Space exploration has historically been driven by a combination of national pride, scientific curiosity, and strategic competition. As we move more into the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, the next 100 years, as you all are planning, which of those motivations, national pride, scientific curiosity, or strategic competition, is the most powerful driving force that informs the next meeting that you're going to? We'll start with Alexander, and then we'll go to Adnan.
So you're asking us to look 100 years in the future. What's the driving force that brings us into the next century? We have been asking that question in Europe, in ESA. We have been asking that question to our member states last year, actually, as we prepared for a very important meeting, council meeting at ministerial level. That's how we call our 3-year funding cycles. Mm-hmm. And we came up with a strategy. And this strategy has 5 corner elements, right? And the first one is to protect our planet and protect our climate. The second one is to explore and to discover. The third one is to strengthen autonomy and resilience. The fourth one is to boost growth and competitiveness. And the fifth one is to cooperate and to inspire. I know I'm not answering your question because you asked which is the most important and most powerful.
Out of those 5, which is number 1?
Well, there's a reason that there are 5, yeah? And this is really, if you really have to pick one today for ESA, not speaking for anyone else, then science. Science, exploration, discovery is both on Earth, in space, beyond Earth orbit, is a very, very powerful driver for our governments to invest. But of course, this doesn't mean that resilience, autonomy is neglected, not at all. So I think it's really, what we see today, it's really a mix of those. Having said that, clearly looking globally, the dimension of national pride, of power, and we are in a new great power competition, matters for space. Some call it a second space race, right? This is terminology also that we've seen 50 years ago in the 1960s and the end 50s, early 60s. So that is clearly something that matters a great deal for many reasons. But still, the 5 elements that we have defined, I think, play all an important role in what we see here.
And Adnan, your national system is actually literally making plans in 100-year cycles. So how do you consider this question? How are you oriented around this question?
As you mentioned, it has been always driven by that prestige, national pride, curiosity, and competition. In my opinion, we see the driving power behind it. The most powerful one is the strategic societal relevance. Today's space capability is becoming part of our daily life, part of daily operation when it comes to the climate monitoring, navigation, communication, economic resilience, and so on. So curiosity is important as well as the exploration, but it's always important that relate that to the advancement of scientific discoveries that will benefit human. This way, the way that you relate it, so that you can always get that support, the political and the public commitment and support. From UAE's perspective, we always looked into that. We saw the space as a platform for collaboration, not just competition. This is the way that we design our missions, like the Hope probe, for example. It was a mission not only to study the Martian atmosphere, but also to provide that valuable data to the scientific community around the world, a mission of hope for the youth, for the next generation, but also developing the capabilities nationally. And we have many examples as well when it comes to our Mars 2117, 100 years strategy to build a settlement on Mars and sending humans to Mars. So when we develop that strategy, we always look into definitely the national interest and where are the gaps that we have, but also we link that with the international gaps when it comes to the global exploration roadmap. We have the gaps defined when it comes to technologies and data. And we relate to that, and we relate that to our national objectives. And accordingly, we developed our space robotics capabilities, develop our astronaut programs, deep space missions, develop that ecosystem supporting our programs and our national objectives. But at the same time, it has global outcomes that we're the key and active player in the implementation of the global exploration roadmap.
So I'm going to come back to Mars in a moment with all of the announcements about the moon today. But first and foremost, space agencies have traditionally been the primary drivers of not only foresight, but technological breakthroughs for the space sector, whether that's in materials science or computing, you name it. But today, commercial companies are increasingly important. The space economy is projected to reach $1 trillion in the very, very near term, if not already. And so as commercial companies are leading in areas like propulsion, manufacturing, and autonomy, how has that model of private-public partnership fundamentally changed? And in your seat, are you looking at primary partners across the governmental space, or are you looking increasingly to commercial partners as driving geopolitical actors? And Adnan, we'll start with you for that.
Sure. So agency has been always that innovator. I think that model did not disappear. It has evolved. Yes, the commercial sector and the private sector advance technologies, and they do fast manufacturing, development, and delivery of the products and the solutions. But you always need the space agencies to set up that long-term plan strategies, to be that system architect, to be the one that absorbing the risks as well, and most importantly, the anchor for international cooperation. Those are the roles of the space agencies that play, and providing that platform for the commercial sector to evolve and develop. And you can see that clearly with the Artemis program. So you have that long-term vision defined, and it's an opportunity for the industry to develop the capabilities and the products. I think industry works in years, but agencies work in decades.
Alexander?
So industry has always played a really, really important role in space. We often say, we ESA, we build satellites, which is not quite accurate. It's industry building satellites, right? But you're absolutely right. The role that industry plays today is transforming, is changing, and we find that extremely interesting and important. Still, there is also a role and a place for governmental space agencies, as we saw this morning also with NASA, of course. You know, that exactly gave this spirit, what we've seen today of a national and international vision, the drive. We need you, we need industry, we need international partners. And when you look in Europe, the ESA example, it's very similar. You know, what does ESA do today? It's a risk-sharing partner for industry. It can be an anchor customer as well, right, if there is upfront investment from the private sector. It federates interest, because let's not forget, ESA is actually pooling resources of 23 governments. That's a lot of governments to talk to and to bring together. You can help create markets. You can accompany industry along the way. But absolutely, what you've said before is really important. That relationship and the dynamics are changing, and that's good. That's not a problem at all for ESA or for any other space agency around the world, not for NASA. I believe there is a role, there's a very important role of governmental space agencies alongside industry. And industry and the governmental side, they have their advantages, their niches, their dynamics. And what we have to ensure is that this interplay between industry and governmental agencies works well, so that the output is the best we can have.
One follow-up question that you don't have to answer, and I should note for the audience, you're more than welcome to, we'll get to in-person questions here at the end of the conversation for about the last 15. But if you want to submit a question online, then it will show up on this screen right here, and we can either hear your voice saying it, or I can read it for you. But please don't ask anonymous questions if you are confident in what you are actually asking. The follow-up question here for you is, would you rather have 23 member states, or would you rather have 23 companies that have the ability to work with on any given day? Which is a trickier negotiation for you in driving alignment towards achieving mission goal or mission success?
I'm not sure if there is, from the perspective of mechanics of negotiation and federation of common interest, a lot of difference at the end of the day. Because when you negotiate, of course, there are different, let's say, there's a different context that you have to deal with, but the mechanics of bringing actors with very specific interests to the table and try to come out of this negotiation exercise with a solution or several solutions in parallel that fit the ecosystem and bring us forward, there's probably not much difference. The interesting thing is looking back at, last year we celebrated 50 years of ESA, so half a century of the European Space Agency. That model has worked overall. It has worked. ESA has grown from originally 11 member states to 23. And we've seen a very, very successful council at ministerial level just in last November. And that shows that the system is relevant and that it delivers. Because if there's no interest of the stakeholders, that is the member states, or in your example, that would be industry, in a system, then it wouldn't be there anymore, or would have been profoundly transformed. That is not the case, which shows that it can deliver on the promise to bring different interests together and get an output that is more than 23 interests, the sum of 23 interests, but something that is a European Space Agency strategy together with international partners.
I'm no longer in government, so I can take the liberty of saying I think that the incentive structure for the commercial space actors versus member states is probably more straightforward to navigate in many regards. Adnan, I would ask you a follow-up question in that same vein of, would it be possible for us to get back to the moon or to get to Mars if not for the role of space agencies? In other words, if the role of government evaporated overnight from the space sector, would industry have the incentive or the vision or resource to absorb the amount of risk, as you say, to get to some of those more ambitious goals?
I believe definitely we need the space agencies to lead that. We need this space agency to define the strategy and the long-term plans and define the architecture, allowing the industry in order to be able to contribute. Still, space is expensive. It's costly. Still, we are lacking standards as well in space compared to other industries. There are many challenges that we need to overcome in order to be fully independent, to have that solid, strong business model. And we can see the business model when it comes to space, sometimes in certain areas quite mature, but many areas they are not. They're still fully dependent on government-led missions and government support.
Mm-hmm. So picking up on the theme of government support, government leadership, this past November, Alex, as you mentioned, ESA secured a record budget commitment of 22.1 billion euros, 0.3.
3 billion.
That is sitting at a nonprofit, that is a significant difference over the next 3 years. Now the task for you becomes turning the largest budget commitment in your history into program milestones across 23 member states, while, as I said before, you're navigating differing national interests. So how are you navigating that? What does the prioritization look like, in particular, in comparison to, as an example, the NASA announcements this morning?
Yeah, well, also...
Or is there, let me ask that a different way, is there a European version of Ignition that is coming up that we should mark our calendars for as soon as possible?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, also NASA has to navigate, interests of various stakeholders. The United States have many stakeholders in the country, right? Industry, politics, public-private sector. There's a lot of interest to be reconciled there as well. Again, we are used to this procedure, this mechanism works. So it's a lot of money, even though everything is relative in life, right? Here in the United States, you talk about a different level of funding. Still, what is important is that last year, this was the highest subscriptions we ever got for our programs. I think that in relative terms is a very important and powerful message, and not by coincidence for many reasons. How do we do that? Well, of course, this money has to be spent for our programs with industry, because at the end of the day, the industrial policy is at the core of what ESA does, to build, to strengthen, to expand the European space sector. And that is why, by the way, I should have said before also, we are not only negotiating with governments, but of course also with industry on a daily basis. Hundreds of contracts that have to be done every month. This is something that we are also very, very much used to. But this delivery on the promises, on the programs, on the expectations, this is really, really important. That's at the core of what a governmental space agency can do and must do. And when you were asking the question before about, can all this be done without a government or a governmental structure? I was just thinking back to the very, very impressive things we heard this morning. And then the question goes back to you, to everyone. Could all this be done without NASA? Would the United States be where it is today in space without NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration? Governmental. And I think we all agree, probably not. Of course, as we said, in the future, this dynamic between the private sector and the public sector will change, is changing already, but both have a reason to be here and a role to play, and the same is true in Europe.
I have to admit, in the United States, we also have subnational stakeholders which are challenging to navigate. And for those of you from the domestic space agency, as a native son of Colorado, I can say that the competition between Colorado and Alabama, as an example, is heated, to say the least, right now for how allocation of resources gets made. Adnan, for you, on the issue of NASA collaboration, leadership, et cetera, and partnership especially, the UAE has a really, really rich history of collaboration. And I say rich history, it's a recent history of collaboration between NASA's Lunar Gateway program, joint science projects, astronaut missions, and more. Just this morning with the announcement of ignition and the prioritization of a sustained lunar presence, how does that, and it may be too soon to ask, and so this might not be a fair question, but how does that change priorities, or how do you adjust priorities to kind of match that mission or continue partnership, especially on the Lunar Gateway program?
I thought that was going to be the first question. Well, our partnership with NASA is a strategic long-term partnership. We are not here partner in a single mission. In fact, it spans over different areas. Beyond the Lunar Gateway, we're working in the space exploration, deep space missions, human life sciences, astronauts programs, and beyond. So it's a long-term strategic partnership. Another thing with the announcement that we saw today, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Mr. Jared Isaacman on the announcement and NASA for their leadership to bring humanity back to the surface of the moon in a sustainable, permanent way. We have similar plans with Mars 2007. It's a long-term strategy that we want to go to the moon first, then go to Mars, and this is something really aligned with our strategy. When it comes to the announcement, yes, we had the partnership and the work on the Lunar Gateway as the UAE contributing with the airlock module. Now we are relocating this partnership and collaboration to broader activities. We have the lunar surface. Now we're talking about entire ecosystem rather than a single destination and orbiter station. Many opportunities for the surface in terms of the power, comm, robotics, and this is an area that we're evolving as well as we are developing our advanced space robotics mission to the surface of the moon, habitation, and beyond. So now it's a platform for really long-term sustainable partnership. I think this model, what we saw today as well, it provides opportunities for other nations as well, emerging nations space, to take part in this ecosystem. A lot of entry points rather than having one platform. And where are the areas of cooperation? Okay, let's do some science here and there, but now we have the entire ecosystem, and there are many gaps and many contributions that we can provide and support as a UAE, and also the entire, the emerging space nations and the entire space community. So, in fact, this announcement, broader, it's an opportunity to expand our cooperation rather than focusing only on a single Lunar Gateway or airlock module contribution. It allows also our academia, our industry, others as well to contribute in this ecosystem.
I think that's a really important point. And I think given the announcement was made this morning, we have a lot of homework to do, and I'm sure that some of the folks that are watching virtually right now are trying to think through how they're responding to the 15 or so requests for information that NASA put out this morning that will lead to more collaboration with the commercial sector, et cetera. But that point on ecosystem development and having very clear priorities that can expand partnership even while you narrow goals is I think, essential to achieving success in this space. The one follow-up question that I would ask is, in terms of achieving a narrow goal and then moving to the next goal, how does today's announcement impact Mars 2117 program, or the UAE's goal of establishing human settlement on Mars by that year, which is one of the most ambitious things, right? If we showed up in any place in any of our countries in like a hometown and said, we're going to be on Mars by 2117, their eyes would probably light up as a measure of like, I don't totally understand how that's going to happen, or wow, that would be incredible. So how does achieving something like a sustained lunar presence lead to a sustained Mars presence? And does that goal remain intact for you?
Indeed, it remains intact. Going back to the Mars 2117, let's talk about the strategy itself and how are we going to implement that. So it's a strategy, it's a vision, and beyond that, that's a commitment from the UAE for the next 100 years. We're going to invest in advanced space science and technology to reach the moon as a platform to develop the capabilities that will enable us to reach Mars, and to do that collaboratively with the international community. We have 4 pillars in order to do that. One is the research and development, which is important. And when we talk about the research and development, we're talking about the mission, the programs that we launch as part of the strategy. From the Mars 217, we launched the space robotics labs to develop advanced space robotics systems to the surface of the moon with the rovers that we develop, and we're developing the pipeline. And this, again, I link it to the first question. We link that to our national objectives as well, to develop robotics capabilities within the country. With the previous missions that we launched orbiters around Earth or orbiting around Mars, but with the robotics missions, it's the first time we are developing missions landing another celestial body on the moon. So it's one area. Another thing is the second program, which is the sustainable astronaut program. Human element is a key. So we've been always focusing on engineering, robotics, but now we need to also focus the human element. So developing corps of astronauts that will be participating in microgravity missions and hopefully one day to the surface of the moon. We launched also the Human Life Science Program and many other programs. So that is the first pillar, the missions, the programs. 2, the enablement. So we're enabling our academia, industry, research institutions to contribute in those programs and those projects. So the announcement today, as I mentioned earlier, you have the entire ecosystem and opportunity for them to contribute. Thirdly, we have the education and outreach, which is an integral part in every single program and mission that we develop and we work on. We need always to prepare your next generation of scientists, researchers, engineers, architects, leaders to continue this work. And the 4th pillar, the international collaboration, which again also another integral element in every single program and mission that we work on. So with the announcement, it aligns very well with those pillars and with our strategy, basically.
The way that you're describing it nearly sounds like ignition, even with its 3 sub-phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, is an overall phase 1 to achieving Mars 2117. So in other words, the US just announced a program to support the Emirati goal of getting to Mars by 2117.
I think in general, all goals are aligned and we have the same target to go to the moon and Mars. And the way that we develop also our strategy, we looked into the existing plans. We did not come with something totally new from scratch. Mm-hmm. We looked into the existing plans when it comes to the Global Exploration Roadmap, which NASA and international space agencies, the US Space Agency, contributed in the development of that Global Exploration Roadmap, defining the gaps there. And we are coming and contributing and filling in those gaps. And the same thing that we're going to do here as well with the announcement today with the NASA Ignition program.
In terms of building ecosystem and sustaining ecosystem and then reiterating on the ecosystem as we go, the ISS is expected to deorbit at some point in the next decade, give or take some change there. And European astronauts will need a new platform or new platforms for long-duration spaceflight. Last month, ESA published a call for tenders for feasibility studies on European-led LEO outpost. How does that contribute to ecosystem, and what is the thinking behind that with respect to some of those 5 priorities that you mentioned to begin with on strategic autonomy, et cetera?
Right. I think it responds to all 5 of them. But before going there, let me go just a moment to the ISS. You mentioned the International Space Station. I think you're all very familiar with the ISS. That is a very unique example of international cooperation, of diverse benefits, of learning how to live and work in an ecosystem that we call the low Earth orbit. Today we speak about low Earth orbit economy, LEO economy, post-ISS economy. That's very interesting. That's the term LEO economy that we didn't think of 30 years ago or thought very differently, shows that there's a transformation ongoing in this space, in this near Earth space. But ISS has really shown that it is possible to achieve things we thought impossible with international cooperation, through international cooperation, pooling resources, building an infrastructure where different countries operate together. In that, and over many years. We shall also not forget this is now 20 plus years, 25 years ongoing. 1998, I think, the first module being launched for the ISS. So this is quite an achievement. Now, yes, it serves all these 5 priorities. You have a platform to look down on Earth. You have a platform to do microgravity research. You have a platform that allows you to, bring your own capability, contribute with your own autonomous capability to something that's bigger than the sum of these individual contributions, to inspire, to cooperate, to discover. So all of this is an element. But your question actually was, so what happens beyond that, right? Because yes, the ISS is aging and it will not go on forever. So the development of a LEO economy and of governmental and private opportunities, or joint governmental private opportunities in LEO, is something of utmost importance. We've heard that also today, by the way, at the ignition event at NASA. And I don't have to tell you in this country how active many actors, private actors, are already in developing modules, habitats for the post-ISS environment. Also in Europe, we are considering several options. I think there are 2 things you have to distinguish. One is transportation capability, and the other thing is habitation capability. So on the transportation side, cargo and crew. On cargo transportation, ESA is developing what we call the LEO Cargo Return Service, LCRS. That is already very advanced in its development, and European cargo capability to be used also for ISS and beyond ISS. On crew, of course, we do have certain limitations in Europe, as you know. So this is, I think, an opportunity, and we are thinking of options to, advance international cooperation in that area. And yes, you mentioned the study that we are actually 2 parallel pre-phase A studies that we are running for a potential European-led LEO outpost, one of the options we are considering together with our member states. So in sum, we are preparing with the member states for a post-ISS LEO environment. LEO is of enormous strategic importance, and the US partner has underlined that as well, right? Others are doing the same. There are other governmental space stations being developed, already being operated in LEO. So this near-Earth space will, for the foreseeable future, remain one of the prime destinations, not the only one, but one of the prime destinations, and as such a really important ecosystem.
So we'll go live with a question that should appear on the screen right here from an anonymous audience member. How do you think about the tension between national prestige and genuine multilateral collaboration on flagship missions? So to the point, I'll pick up on this given your answer, to the point on LEO outpost that is distinctly European, will you be obligated to name that after Mario Draghi or something like that? Or is there space for genuine collaboration, or is this collective ecosystem such that it doesn't particularly matter because these priorities are aligned and national prestige, in fact, contributes to multilateral collaboration?
Okay, the name.
You're already
the name
collaborating on the answer, so that's a good sign.
You see, the name will be a very complicated choice, right? When I read this question, how do you think about the tension between national prestige and multilateral collaboration? To be honest, I'm quite relaxed with this because this is the reality since decades. We have learned to navigate that in so many ways. Yes, there is a tension every tension can be overcome or channeled or managed. We've been doing that always. So it's not necessarily an either or, right? And especially on flagship missions, we've been cooperating, especially also with the United States. This is our prime partner. We've had very, very important results together. We are continuing to have important results. We're looking together in the future. That's why we are here today also. Same for you. We are all talking with each other, and we are developing the future together. National component or a prestige component is extremely important, also within Europe. You know, we see that we have ESA astronauts of French origin, for example, with a French passport. I mentioned France because we have currently Sophie Adenau on board of the International Space Station, right? That's a European astronaut. But of course, in France, Sophie is a star. It's very important, like her predecessors. And that's good, and that's wonderful, because you can use that also to generate interest, excitement, etc., etc. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't find ways and means to cooperate and collaborate. Actually, that's, I think, one of the fields, space is one of the fields where, despite the tension, geopolitical tensions, all these decades, we've always found ways and means to collaborate. Not necessarily every country with every other country, admittedly, but still, international cooperation is a reality in space and always has been and will be.
I have to ask what might seem like a silly follow-up question based on His Excellency's connection between sport and space. Are the kits or are the spacesuits for different member states a point of competition like they are in, for instance, sport? And I say this because the World Cup jerseys were just rolled out, and there is a lot of online commentary about that.
See, we have a wonderful and very cheap solution. On one side of the spacesuit, we have the ESA logo, and on the other side, we have the national flag of our astronaut. So the spacesuit is always the same, but we can just change the patch.
Probably technically viable that that's not an area of competition.
No.
Don?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are way beyond that. You know, talk about the national pride or prestige or all of that. We are sharing the same vision, the same goal, going to the moon and Mars, and hopefully beyond that. I think our focus is more of the outcomes and the impacts that we're going to have on our young generation and our nation, our capabilities, and the things that we are developing, rather than focusing on names and flagships and prestige. Those are important elements, but I think we're thinking more strategic way beyond that.
It strikes me that this is one of the last areas, or one of the very narrow areas right now where geopolitical competition actually helps advancement, and that the competition is actually healthy competition and creates a race to the top for collaboration, with some serious areas where we need to deconflict and de-escalate, et cetera. But this is one of the last remaining areas where competition is so intense, both commercially, nationally, et cetera, that collaboration remains, to both of your points in earlier questions, scientific achievement, attaining more curiosity, expanding the universe of knowledge, expanding our understanding of the universe itself, remains an incentive that creates healthy competition among systems.
Absolutely, and honestly, from our experience, working with NASA international partners on the Lunar Gateway and other programs, we never felt that competition, to be honest. We're supporting each other's. We face some technical difficulties. We sit together as a team, try to find solutions to make things happen, not to push things on others, because at the end of the day, we have one common goal. So as relatively newcomer and such kind of arrangement, we saw all this support from NASA and the international partners, and we didn't see that element of competition. It's more of collaborative, cooperative work.
So pivoting to another audience member question, but hopefully building on that, investments in space are at an all-time high. How can space leaders harness this momentum to achieve their program's ambition? Thank you to Emily in the audience. I will add to that, how do you leverage the sheer amount of capital not being committed by countries, but by commercial actors to achieve mission outcomes? Is there a specific strategy to say, okay, we're going to grow this economy to $1 trillion or more, But how do you leverage that private capital that's coming into this space to achieve a collaborative result? And is that dynamic of bringing private actors in or private investment in, does that sustain that nature of collaboration that you're talking about when there's a slight challenge or an equation didn't quite add up the way that you thought it was going to? With private actors, is there still a room that you go back to kind of work it out? And is that possible with various levels of actors, both national and private?
Yeah, I think we can see the private actors becoming very active recently with their programs and with their missions. And those also provide opportunities for nations to advance in their programs and to achieve their goals much faster and quicker ways. And they have different platforms to do that rather than developing that indigenously within the nations, within their programs, but also using the private sector and actors and the investments that we see in that area. But at the end of the day, that huge investment coming from the private sectors, if you ask yourself, who are the customers, the end users? Space agencies, governments, right? To be very realistic, today they won't be able to survive and have that long-term, again, solid business model without having that space agency support and being on board of those missions that they're developing and they're investing in. And that's the role of the space agency, to support that, to enable that, and continue growing the space sector and the private sector. And how to do that? With programs, with missions, with long-term visions, as I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. I think where governments, private investors, where they meet, where everyone is the same, is in the simple truth that who invests wants a return of investment, whatever that is, right? Gain more capital, knowledge, a system that allows to more efficiently manage society, help them, navigation, communication systems. No matter what it is, if you invest, you want a return of investment. That's very important. Now, to the question, investments in space at an all-time high, how can space leaders harness this momentum to achieve their ambition? Vision, strategy, direction. Sounds simple, very difficult, but I think we've seen today an example of exactly that. We try to give that in Europe through our programs. And the right framework conditions. Let's not forget, we're talking here about space agencies, but of course the public sector is more than space agencies. So, the right conditions to invest, to be willing to invest, that is really important. This momentum certainly today is here in many different ways, and we see that leaders are using that momentum and contributing to that momentum.
So you brought up the word framework. I'm going to extrapolate that to standards or procedures and go to a question from John T. in the audience. What international standards, technical or procedural, do you foresee being the most important to success of international collaboration on ignition or any other projects?
So here I have to make a footnote before I answer. I answer with a legal and international relations background. So if you ask me about technical and procedural standards, that's dangerous for me to answer. But I can tell so much. In what we've seen today,
someone at the ITU is extraordinarily thankful that you just answered it that way.
When we see this vision of a moon base with all these components and an international undertaking, interoperability will play a big role. Standardization, interoperability, and that's something that we see already today for different systems, also in different fields of space. playing a role, and it matters. Specifically for exploration, we will also have to see what artificial intelligence will allow us to do, when we have at distant destinations a latency time that makes it maybe difficult to have real-time decisions from the surface of Earth. Now I speak about Mars. When you have human-robotic interfaces that have to work in an autonomous way far away or in crisis situations, new technical standards, new procedural standards matter a lot. The further we go away from Earth, the more we need to find ways and means to be autonomous where we are and take the right decisions with what we have. So this is where artificial intelligence, I believe, as one of the components come in very much. So the standardization, I can speak for ESA and for Europe, is standardization and interoperability are two elements that we really, really are interested in and that I believe will play a very important role.
Do you hit any frictions on interoperability with commercial actors?
There are different, depending on which topic we are now examining. Of course, there are different approaches sometimes, different industry directions or interests, but we have also, again, the ways and means to moderate that. But yes, friction is inevitably part of the game. The problem is not friction, like the problem is not competition, because we were talking before about cooperation and competition. These are not mutually exclusive, not at all, on the opposite. It's always the question, how do you moderate that and bring it together and then produce an output? And I think we have ways and means how we can manage friction. There will be always winning models over others, standards that prevail over others. We've seen that in many domains in the past, where certain standards or systems didn't survive and others did. That's normal part of the process.
Adnan, UAE has an extraordinarily important role in this conversation on international standards because it isn't the US, Europe, Russia, China. It has an extraordinarily important perspective. Is there a main gap that you see to achieving success in collaboration across the standards setting space or the procedural space?
I totally agree with Alexander when it comes to the interoperability, and I would like to emphasize more to the AI part of it. Autonomy and AI, they're becoming more increasingly part of the space operations, data processing, value-added products being generated, the telemetry, the data that we're getting from satellite, that we need to develop those standards, how you manage that. And from our side, I think that there are areas where we need to work on when it comes to the AI, in terms of the standardization, in terms of the ethics, how are we going to use that in order to generate that decision based on what? The data themselves should be standardized and AI ready, because at the end of the day, you need to train that data to generate your knowledge. So how you standardize the preparation of that data and make them AI ready are important. I think there are gaps, and when it comes to the AI, I think the ethics, the governance, as well as the cyber security should be part of it from beginning by design.
This is an outstanding point on AI governance in particular, which is a conversation that is not space-centric, let's say, right now. But for instance, the first multilateral effort towards AI governance is kicking off in July in Geneva through the UN, the Global Dialogue on AI Governance. And so what I'm hearing in that set of conversations is that there should be a subcategory for how it impacts space in particular, given the fact that it is happening in a city and in a UN ecosystem that is also responsible for space.
Absolutely. I think the conversation must happen now rather than happening later when an incident happens and then you take a reactive regulation and action. So yes, we need to have the conversation today.
The last question that I want to ask before we go to the next panel is, On the next generation and preparing for next generation, each of your organizations is investing in the next generation of space professionals. What qualities and values, in addition to the hard skills that are required for all of the things that we're trying to achieve in space, do you want to instill in the plethora of space professionals that are emerging as part of this ecosystem that we're all describing, whether it's engineers or scientists or policymakers? What are the things that will make a next generation of space leadership and collaboration possible at the human level?
Right. So, as you mentioned, beyond the technical excellence, I think we should emphasize on system thinking, understanding how engineering, operation, and policy intersect. Secondly, I think having that global mindset is important. Space is inherently international. Thirdly, I think it's the resilience and adaptability. Space programs might take years and decades, and you need to be resilient. I think from our side, we also need to focus on the early exposure of students and young professionals to real missions, and to have that multidisciplinary skill sets coming from other sectors and other industries. I think one area or one strength that we have in the UAE when it comes to the young professionals, we see them as the builders of the future, not just as participants.
Do you think that there's going to be a moment where the professionals or the workforce that was very focused on cybersecurity as that scaled as an industry and then kind of pivoted to AI, when is the moment for space coming?
I think space is everywhere. It's integral in different disciplines. It's an area that you need the specialized people in cybersecurity and AI, but engineering, science, medicine, architects. So it's inclusive. And those skill sets definitely needed when it comes to the satellite operation, when it comes to the ground segment, data processing, and as I mentioned earlier, to have that use of the data in a responsible way.
Alexander?
Very short. Agreed with everything, Adnan, you said. In very simple terms, so the next generation is so essential because nothing of what we do here today will go forward if they don't take it forward. Mm-hmm. And I think in addition to all the skills, system thinking, etc., what I found always very useful and what I see with our young generation at ESA, the graduate trainees that we have, it's the ability to listen, mm-hmm. to listen to different languages. And I don't mean Spanish or English or French. I mean the language of other professions, right? That the engineers and the scientists, and yes, the lawyers and the policymakers and the finance experts mm-hmm. find a common language to bring that joint project forward. That's really important.
So continuing to build up a workforce and a talent base that is inclusive and respective of the point that we all say on a continuous basis of everything that happens beyond Earth impacts our day-to-day lives. Everything that happens in a workforce in our day-to-day lives is somehow connective or inclusive for our space future. I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate your time today. I'm excited to turn the conversation over to my close colleague, Newton Campbell, who will kick us off for our next conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right there. Cool. All right. Okay, good stuff. Can everyone hear me? Where did our third panelist go? Oh, he'll be right back. All right, after a brief message. All right, folks. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you very much. I'm Newton Campbell. Thanks, Graham, for a fantastic panel. A little bit of my background, I'm a non-resident fellow here at the Geotech Center, working on artificial intelligence, space, that sort of ecosystem. I also work very closely with the UN ITU on early warnings for all, as well as with NASA. I'm really looking forward to the panel here today because this really is about getting down to some of the more practical elements of deploying space and space communications. Now, space communications has been around for quite some time. It's been a part of the global connectivity discussion for a very long time. The interesting question today is not really whether space matters to communications. It certainly does. What feels different now is a larger commercial boom that has been occurring with many more actors, more intentional capability, and more integration with mainstream telecom sources. Thank you very much. I'm going to sit this right there. Hopefully it doesn't get wet in the water. And so rather than simply asking what new systems are being launched, I'd like us to think about today a more structural question. What kind of communications layer is now being built in space? By whom and on what terms? We're going to move through that question in 4 different lenses today: the changing commercial landscape, technical and operational choices that matter most, the questions of real access and human impact, which is possibly the most significant question, and finally, the governance pressures that are really shaping the sector. So with that, we have 2 incredible panelists that I'm honored to introduce today. I'm joined today by Mark Dankberg, the chairman and CEO of Viasat, as well as Kareem Michel Saba, the managing director of Space 42. Mark has spent decades at this point shaping the technical and commercial direction of satellite communications and its relationship to the broader telecom ecosystem. And Kareem brings a real strong strategic perspective on how satellite communications, geospatial capabilities, and broader infrastructure platforms are evolving together. Before we get started, as we move through our panel, we ask that you go to askac.org. That's askac.org to submit your questions. About 30 minutes in or 25 minutes in, we will actually start to review some of your questions. But enough of me talking. I want to shift right to our panels and start a little bit broad here. We're going to start broad and drill down a little bit. So I'm going to start with the broadest question, which is that space communication has been evolving for a long time, as I said. So from your vantage point, what is genuinely different about the commercial environment now? And Mark, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll have Kareem answer.
Well, it's evolved in the context of what's happening on the terrestrial communications market, where a demand for bandwidth has just grown, unbelievably exponentially, like 25% per capita for the last 25 years or something like that, right? If you look at the bandwidth consumption, so that's one, and then the need for constant ubiquitous connectivity, right? Those 2 things are driving it, and that's, for instance, we started in-flight communications 25 years ago. There were hardly anybody on an airplane with a device that could be connected. In 2008, really with the iPhone, it started where almost everybody could be connected. Could be, then they wanted to be, then they needed to be. Yeah. Right. So that has really created an opportunity from the space perspective to augment or perfect that notion of ubiquitous connectivity, right? That's really what I think is the economic driver of it. The other part is that if you think about it on the terrestrial side, the unit cost of bandwidth has decreased orders of magnitude, right? How much does it cost you to get a megabyte through different transmission media? I remember it wasn't 30 years ago that long distance calls were $1 a minute.
Yes,
right.
I recall.
Okay, what a big change when that was just thrown in. Right. So, to the extent that space has been able to drive down its cost of bandwidth by orders of magnitude, that's also grown the market.
Right, so because you've had over the last 20, 30 years the growth of mobile, IoT, now AI, this is all leading to it.
Right, and then even if you look at I mean, it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but if you look at in-flight connectivity, by far the biggest driver of demand is streaming. And right now, probably the single biggest driver of demand is things like TikTok or Instagram Reels. So that it mirrors what you're seeing on the ground, but nobody's going to pay $10 a gigabyte, right, to do that, right? You've got, in order for that to be useful, you have to drive that airtime cost way down. So that's what I think has become really evident is the demand elasticity with price, right? As the price goes down, the market's grown tremendously. And we're not anywhere near the end of that. I think there's lots more opportunity to drive those airtime costs down and to provide connectivity not only to antennas that are you can put on an airplane or a vehicle or on your house, but to the phones you carry in your pocket. Right, that's kind of the next big thing.
And what about you, Kareem? You know, we just talked a bit about the scaling story and the capital story, but are there other elements to that story here? A standard story, a competition story that you believe is genuinely different about that commercial environment right now?
So, a couple of things we're observing in the commercial environment, and to build on what Mark is saying, the general view is that we're successfully democratizing product and services that we're producing in space and we're delivering to societies and economies. The history of our industry is that we were producing product and services, but they were premiumized. They were wired, they were shaped, they were priced in a manner that they could only serve a few. And what Mark talked about is now we can truly democratize the use of those applications, whether it's in-flight connectivity or connecting cruise ships or what have you. And because of that, we're not just broadening the potential for our sector. I would like to think that we're also contributing to transforming the experience in other sectors. So let's take cruise ships. When we're able today to connect a cruise ship, the experience is radically different. You're attracting a clientele that probably in the past would have said, I'm not willing to be off the grid for a week. You don't have to make that choice anymore. Ditto for in-flight connectivity. And when you sort of, although your question was sort of focused on satellite communication, when you sort of expand that lens to Earth observation, you could see how through our ability to bring down the cost of SRUs, the space resource units, in the case of Earth observation, so data produced in space through sensors, by bringing down the price, we can now bring this information, these new insights to sectors and industries that could not afford them in the past. And so that phenomenon of democratization, I think, is fantastic. And one thing that cuts across the two domains in which we operate, which is Earth observation and satellite communication, and sort of Mark has talked about this earlier today on a different panel. The development cycles in our industry has shifted from years to months. And it's a fantastic opportunity for us, but it requires an enormous adjustment at the level of our organizations because we were not wired to do it this way. We were wired to think about a mission, take a few years to design the mission, a few years to build the missions, a full year to deploy the mission, and 15 years to commercialize it. And now we have to think through this continuum up to putting assets in space and start operationalizing them in matters of 2 years, 3 years, which would have been unthinkable probably 5 years ago. And we think at the outset, and one of the common project we're working on, Equitas, we think up at the outset about what happens next. So once we're done with the first 20 satellites, how the next 20 satellites would look like, and what new technologies and improvement will bring to that. And that speed, and I would like to conclude that, but that sort of the change of speed and technology development and our ability to adjust to it is bread and butter to what we're seeing in the commercial sector.
Absolutely, and you mentioned it right there. Why don't we talk a little bit about Equitas? So you made the announcement, the big announcement in September. There's an uproar in the satellite community, just with excitement. What's progress between them then and now?
So a couple things. One is we're in several fronts. I mean, one is technical, is what is the technical approach to being able to deliver these services. Remember, the one that'll be most impactful is services directly to ordinary cell phones all around the world, right? So that, how to do that competitively is with one of the things we've seen in space is some entities coming in with essentially unlimited capital. So when I want to you have to frame this problem is that when you get to the environment where anybody with an ordinary cell phone can bypass all the terrestrial infrastructure in any country and communicate directly to satellite in an era where people are concerned about data privacy, AI, the way AI is trained and used, exfiltration of data. Boy, these are big topics. So one part of it is I think we have converged on a technical approach that works at least for Viasat and Space 42, budget, program plan, all that, plus methods of how to share infrastructure in space, which is also a very important component of it. I think the thing that Equitas really represents is, if you look at one of the other themes I talked about, which is what makes the service grow and popular, is driving costs down. That is, driving the airtime costs down. Well, capital cost in space is a huge component of that. So being able to share infrastructure is a really powerful way to drive down total cost, especially if you think about for the mobile spectrum, mobile frequencies that are being used, the cost of adding incremental spectrum to a system is far, far less than building a whole new system. So the way things had been done in the past, and this sort of mirrored the terrestrial ecosystem, was, it used to be AT&T had their own towers, Verizon had their own towers. Part of what they realized was, hey, we're not going to compete on undifferentiated infrastructure as long as there's standards. Well, what's really interesting about the satellite mobile space is that the devices that have a standard way of accessing satellite, that becomes a very attractive user base. Now, any user, if they find themselves disconnected, has the ability to use the device they already have with them to become connected. So that's a powerful motivation for the satellite operators to share that infrastructure, to drive costs down, make the infrastructure more capable, more available, better speeds, lower cost. So but doing all that sharing has really never been done in the satellite industry before. So one of the main things we've been working on are what are the business models for doing that. And the other thing, if you keep pulling on that thread a little bit, is in the terrestrial space, what came about were tower companies, which really represents how can I extend that envelope of shared infrastructure in a way that drives down costs for everybody. So that's another really rich vein for satellite operators, where in the past, everyone's their own space system, their own infrastructure, their own handsets, their own waveforms. So this is it's a big change. I think it's like, one of the words Kareem uses is democratizes the service, but it also creates challenges about how countries will manage that and still preserve their national sovereignty and security. And so that's another level of things that we've been working on in that time frame, is how to add sovereign components to this basic shared infrastructure in a way that achieves both the economic purposes and the national security and sovereignty purposes.
What you're talking about is very interesting from the way that the narrative is usually stated when it comes to commercial, especially more. I've seen this more internationally than even in the U.S., and I think that's because of some of the U.S.'s heritage. But when we talk about commercial, we're always talking about competition. It's going to get better because of competition. They're going to be more innovative because of competition. But it gets to a point where space is so difficult that in many ways you do have to share infrastructure. And for instance, with the ISS, we've been doing that under public dollars, sometimes intergovernmental dollars, for so long. doing it in this way is effectively developing somewhat of a new model for sharing. Yes, we do have the shared towers here on Earth, but doing this in space with all the requirements of space has to create some new complexities. So for either of you, where do some of those complexities actually show up with working with some of the organizations that will be leveraging your capability with the governments that are in play? What are some of those complexities that you have to deal with?
I think there's a novelty in the concept. In the concept, I wouldn't sort of want to put it as it's complex because historically, satellite operators have collaborated in terms of deploying or sharing a platform and sort of deploying on the same platform their own payloads. So that concept of sharing a passive infrastructure and having your active part of that infrastructure owned by you there was a starting point. What is new to your point here is this is the first time that we deploy a common infrastructure from A to Z together. Yeah. And the motivation for us here is because we can do it faster and far more efficiently if we do this together, notwithstanding the fact that Space 42 and Viasat compete in the same markets. But when it comes to this part of the infrastructure, it is in our mutual interest to do it together because we can drive down cost, we can accelerate innovation because we are in control of the entire supply chain or the value chain from design to manufacturing to operation. Our intent is to be the founders, but not to be the exclusive owners. So the whole idea is to plant the seed and invite others to come on board because ultimately what we're doing is we're setting the stage for a platform. And by design, it's meant to be open. So these are new concepts, and it takes time for these new concepts to sort of take roots in the discourse within our industry. Now, if we were having this conversation in terrestrial network, it's déjà vu, it's common. So you have tower companies, you have submarine cables that are the outcome of consortium between competing telecom operators. But what we're doing in space is new, so I concede that. But new doesn't mean it's complex. New means it requires open minds on the other side of the fence. What we find in our conversation, and to your point, what happened between now and last September, I think the most insightful piece was the conversation that we've had either together or separately with MNOs, because we got to learn from them what matters to them. And by no particular order, what really matters to them is continuity of the mobility experience to their end user. That's their priority 1, 2 to 100. That's what they want to secure. 2, they want to have control over the relationship with the end user. They don't want to lose that control. So the ability for us to demonstrate that we have a system that can seamlessly interoperate with terrestrial network and leaves the ownership of the end user with the MNOs because that's their bread and butter and we're not challenging this, is super important. 3, they're looking at a model where they can scale, they can deliver coverage as part of their actual network or extended network in a cost-efficient manner. And so if Equitas can deliver that, which is center to our value proposition, then in fact we're meeting the 3 objectives they have in mind. And last but not least is they want to make sure that in creating this working relationship between Equitas and ultimately with Viasat and Space 42 and the MNOs, that they have a partner who will remain a partner in the long term and will not become a competitor. And that sort of, we've learned it through our conversation with them. So at no point in time when we made the announcement in September did Mark or I claim that we had all the answers, but we had a working hypothesis that the shared infrastructure is the right starting point, that if we do it right, we create a platform that attracts other assets and spectrum owners. And last but not least, that this is going to be the most efficient way to scale up and team up with the MNOs.
And so let's tug on another thread that you discussed a little bit with the end user, and this is going beyond Equitas and to some of your other portfolios. But One of the things that at least I've been exploring a lot lately has been the early warning capabilities, capabilities for folks in remote communities to gain access. When people talk about access, things can become very abstract very quickly. So from a concrete standpoint, where do some of your new commercial capabilities create meaningful value first, and for whom? Who's going to be the first users whose situation materially improves based on some of the capabilities in your portfolio?
So I'm going to give you two extremes. Okay. Extreme one would be someone who lives in a very isolated portion of a country that really doesn't have any connectivity, okay, and who either doesn't have the money or the wherewithal to get an expense, let's say a service that costs $20 or $30 or $50 a month, which looks really expensive to a lot of people, right? But they may have a cell phone, and they may be able to pay a few dollars a month. So that person can have connectivity. It could be life-changing, right? They may have limited use of it, but that'd be one example. The flip side, think of a market of billions of people whose life is only affected a little bit every day, but is nevertheless affected. So, I live in San Diego, and it's kind of hilly, mountainous. There's zoning constraints for cell phones, and it's not. It happens fairly often if you're driving that your call is going to drop because of shadowing or some zoning restriction. Even if it only drops for a minute, 30 seconds or 20 seconds, if you have to redial that call, that's kind of irritating. So that happens to hundreds of millions of people every day, multiple times. So that's the other extreme. A little bit of life improvement, but for a very large number of people. I think that you'll see those two and other things in between from, things, one of the examples we know occurs is precision agriculture. Yeah. And you'll see farmers who have fields that are large enough that some portion of their field has terrestrial cellular coverage and they can use all the latest gadgets, but another part of their field doesn't. And when they move the tractors from one end to the other, all of a sudden a lot of those techniques no longer apply. So imagine you're in an environment where you can deal with that entire plot in a consistent way and get the benefits of it. I'd say those are pretty interesting examples.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kareem?
Mark covered it all, and we spend a lot of time, sort of our respective strategy teams spend a lot of time thinking about what categories of end users, how should we think about the different categories of end users. And we started with the extremes. And one extreme, and I say extreme not in a derogatory manner, it serves extreme in reference to the need to have access to this service. So just to put things into perspective, both Space 42 and Viasat have been in the MSS business for decades, i.e. in mobile satellite services. So we understand this business. We understand the difference it makes when we can deliver a service to an area that is not connected to a terrestrial network. However, we were constrained by the fact that our technology was operating on standards that were different than terrestrial standards. So we had to deliver this service by designing and commissioning our own modified devices. And so you fast forward to Equitas. Now we have the opportunity to move from a market of few millions of users to billions of users. And in that total addressable market, there is going to be a small or a certain number of users who would rely on our service for probably 90% of the time. This is where Mark started, because they happen to live in rural areas that are not covered. And then in 10% of the time, they happen to drive into areas that are covered by terrestrial network. So they are going to be small number, high intensity. And on the other side of the spectrum is what Mark referred to. And anything that sits in between. Now, bear in mind that what we're doing together is not just for terrestrial applications, it will be for maritime application and aeronautical applications. And the benefit of the work we're doing together is not just that we're deploying a system and infrastructure in space that is common, but that we are putting to use our spectrum, which is a globally harmonized spectrum, and a single globally harmonized spectrum that makes the experience seamless. And because of that, we can operate in the 3 different terrains or 3 different domains in a manner that ultimately allows us to go back to what I've said before, truly democratize the whole idea of connectivity and mobility. That's what keeps us. Often people ask us, what is the purpose of Equitas? And it's very simple. It's to extend the mobility experience that people have on Earth, on the terrestrial connectivity. And as long as we do that, we know that we've achieved it. And every day we need to ask the question, are we doing this in the most efficient manner? Because between now and 2040, which is the runway of our business plan, we are putting on ourselves the objective that at every interval, probably every year, we want to improve the productivity of our system, which then allows us to serve customers with an improved service and with a lower price point, going back to the objective of truly democratizing the purpose of connectivity.
Yeah, and we need to do that. You know, as Kareem mentioned, we've been doing these mobile satellite services for decades, so there are literally hundreds of thousands of ships at sea that depend on mobile connectivity where there are no cellular carriers, aircraft that are using it for aeronautical safety, air traffic control. So part of the challenge here is to improve the service on a go-forward basis without abandoning the commitments to the people that are using the existing services. That's a big part of what we're also dealing with here.
Yeah, just kind of speaking to, again, thinking about those end users. As we've been talking about all this interoperability. We've been talking about infrastructure sharing, but again, this is a little bit of my emergency services hat on. How are you balancing that interoperability and efficiency with certain countries' desire for sovereignty, for governance over their own, you know, I guess you would say communication lanes, et cetera? What do you see has to be global in terms of capabilities versus what legitimately needs to remain sovereign in some of the discussions that you've had?
Yeah. Well, we spend a lot of time on this. So you want to start, Mark?
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting here, in order to do the function we described, which is to be able to go from a satellite directly to the cell phone you've got in your pocket, you need power levels on the ground that, in this case, do require satellites that are in low orbit. Once you put a satellite in low orbit, even a country, let's say the size of the U.S., those satellites are only in view of the U.S. 1 or 2% of their time. So 99% of the time, they're over the rest of the world, okay? So one of the things, you know, for the U.S., what the U.S., and the same thing would be true of Europe or Brazil or any other country, is like, well, what I'm really concerned about is when somebody's satellites are over my country, are they complying with my national telecommunications regulations? That is, you know, everything from lawful intercept to fair market access, consumer privacy.
Spectrum.
Right, so, and spectrum use. Yeah. So that really now you've got what the seeds are of the sovereignty issue, which is how can I make it so that whatever satellites are over my country are complying with my national regulations and laws, and can I trade with other countries in a way where when they're over their country, that they get to have that level of compliance, and when their satellites are over my country, will they swap with me, right? So think of it as what we're doing on a commercial basis. Now we want to be able to extend to national countries. Well, one of the good things is they've already got people that do that, and those would be, example, their national mobile network operators, right? And those are the ones who are really interested in adding this experience. So we can construct a mechanism whereby some of that control can be handed to mobile network operators in those countries while the satellites are in view of their country. Now, I'm simplifying a number of the elements, but that gets you like 80% of the way there, right? And we already do that, for instance, in in-flight communications or in aeronautical safety or maritime safety through a distribution network or national partnerships. What we're really talking about is institutionalizing that in a commercial, third-party, trusted way. But you can see how that deals with a large amount of the sovereignty issues. Now, there's another part where you may have some countries that say, well, I've got global needs. Okay, well, you can have a global component of this system, which is yours. You can control it all the time, but I'll bet you that's only a portion of the need that you have in your country. So doesn't it make sense for you to participate in this?
So by design, there's a clear separation in the technology that you
Yeah, you can if you can anticipate this. But part of it is just to start with. Wow, if every country built its own national system, that's going to be an economic nightmare for one. The other element of this, which is really important, is one of the things that's becoming evident when people are talking about putting up millions of satellites, is the space sustainability portion of it, right? We're just now, I think, starting to reckon with what has become sort of evident over the last 5 years, which is orbital resources are limited, spatial separations are limited, just like you have with dealing with telecom infrastructure on the ground. It's wireless, same things in space. So that sovereignty element allows countries to have a voice, both a voice in it, and I think from the other perspective, it gives them a stake in sustainable space, right? Because one of the other things that this was headline news a year or so ago is, you may have some countries who think, hey, we'll be better off if nobody has access to space, right? So now that you've seen weaponization of space, that's not a very good thing. I think one of the ways to discourage that would be to have more countries have a stake in access to space and in sort of the space neutrality.
Yep. Anything to add?
So what Mark described is a principle that we set as an objective from day one, which is how do we create a technology model and a business model that allows national infrastructure to integrate international infrastructure. And it has never been done before. And partly is on the design of our system, as Mark described it. There's another variant of it where countries may say, look, we understand what you're saying, but we still, for the reason of pride, I think this point was brought up by Graham on the earlier conversation. For pride or for whatever reasons, we want those direct-to-device assets to have our national flag. So we want, 50 spacecraft that flies over country X to be our spacecrafts. The challenge for them is once they leave the national territory, they can't do anything. And so part of the Equitas model is to allow them to integrate seamlessly. So go back to what Mark was referring to, interoperability, not just with terrestrial network, but across space networks, so that they interoperate in a seamless manner, so that we can put to use these assets as part of the Equitas constellation where they're not flying over the national territory, provided they follow the same open standards that we are candidly ready to share with others, one, and two, provided that they sort of come up with a design that can deliver the space resource unit at the same price point that we're delivering it, so that there is this symmetry in the way we compensate them and the way Equitas is being compensated. So in a sense, we thought about the technology, we thought about the business model, and we thought about the pricing model to allow also large nations that could justify in their mind, whether it's for pride reason or other reasons, that they have their own infrastructure for direct-to-device that we can integrate into our system and we can put to use, which, by the way, will be super efficient for us because we get to access now assets that are funded by the capital of another entity.
Right.
And so it's a wonderful way for us to densify our network. You may be wondering, how come these guys have all the answers for these difficult questions? And Mark and I spend a lot of time. Our hair was white before we started. Let me start with this disclaimer. But we spend a lot of time thinking about the principles of how we will address certain difficult questions that come up. So this is why I said we wouldn't claim to have all the answers. But literally, I remember this was in August last year, where we were editing the same document, which we called principles. And we said, this is how we will address, this is the process through which we'll address the following difficult question when they will come up. Because our teams doing their job were trying to find all the possible answers.
Of course.
And we would be like a decade later and we will still not be at the starting gate. So we said, no, let's agree on the principles. So I just wanted to explain how come we seem to be confident about the direction in which we're going. We're not confident about all the answer, but we're confident about the direction.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. I'm going to shift to a couple of audience questions. This first one by Anonymous, I believe, has largely been answered, but let's be explicit about it. What's the biggest challenge for a shared space infrastructure from a commercial perspective, especially with the rising attention to sovereign capabilities? You just were touching on a lot of that.
We have to demonstrate that what we're doing can be executed, because we're thinking about it. I mean, the US has, I think, expressed in no implicit manner their sovereignty requirements, and I would posit under the control of the two senior leaders from the UAE that the UAE is not shy from also expressing its sovereign requirements. And nevertheless, we found ways to sort of bring together this conversation. In fact, I was in an earlier meeting with the European Space Agency where they expressed interest in a European sub-network that could integrate equities. So I'm not speaking on their behalf, but all I'm saying is, in the spirit of transparency, that this topic came up in the conversation as part of our value proposition. So I think we can reconcile that. I can understand where the question came up, why the question is coming up, because we're now recognizing, the importance of space as a sovereign domain, which probably was not the comprehension or the appreciation we've had a decade or so ago. We just took space as a domain. It is truly a sovereign domain. We get to appreciate this in the UAE firsthand, given recent events over the past 3 weeks. And space has been, I would like to think, front and center in supporting the efforts of the nation to defend itself. But I think sovereignty should not be an exclusion to the kind of cooperation that we're doing together. And here you have two operators who could sort of, after a well-thought process, find common ground. And I would like to think that this common ground is going to invite others in the future.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I would say one of the biggest ones is just trust. And that was a big part of why we chose the name Equitas, is that it's intended to be equitable.
Oh, I like that.
And so the idea is I think we're likely to have third parties as original founders of Equitas who are not service operators, but have a different perspective in the ecosystem. And we're also, let's say one of the other things that's really interesting is, Viasat acquired Inmarsat, Space 42 acquired Thuraya, which used to be kind of very intense competitive rivals, and now here we are able to cooperate on a framework that we both believe is fair. I think that says a lot about the progress that we've made. But that, just that single, you can come up with a bunch of excuses or reasons not to do it on the trust basis. On the flip side is the market won't be there and we won't be able to compete if we're not cost effective. And so there is an imperative and a prize, it's a little bit game theory, but there's a prize for being equitable. That's basically, I think, one of the main lessons. I think we're fortunate to have found a way to work together. I think
you could see that we converted Mark into a brand guy. Yeah.
I mean, you guys are telling me that cooperation in space can actually, be productive, be lucrative. This is
and it may be essential.
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
Yep. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Let's go with another anonymous question. What advice do you have for policy-minded individuals who want to get more involved in the private space sector when positions/roles are often geared towards more technical skill sets, i.e. engineers?
Well,
It's very practical.
yeah, well, I'll tell. So I think one of the main sources of innovation does come from looking at experiences in other areas. And one of the things I think is really interesting about the space domain in general is that it is a shared domain. One of the issues that I know a number of countries have concerns about is, how do I have sovereignty in space when country A or B can launch unlimited numbers of satellites? If they have launch capability that I don't have, I don't like it, but what can I do, right? And so there are some, some of this is space, loss of space is it's actually a mutually assured destruction type of environment. It doesn't, if you look at what's happened with kinetic hits to satellites or people talking about putting nuclear weapons in space, the hurdles to deny space to everybody, those hurdles are coming down, those barriers are coming down. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in the diplomacy field in looking at how the world has dealt with other situations that are sort of game theoretic, mutually assured destruction, where treaties come into place. And in doing that, you need to know what are the scarce resources, what are the mechanisms of verification. Space is kind of interesting because it's hard to hide stuff in space. So that creates opportunities that maybe you don't have in other domains that have similar problems.
Yeah. And I think the opportunity for policy-minded to join the private sector is because the pace at which technology innovation now is unfolding, as I referred to at the start, it has to happen with a commensurate evolution of policies, regulation, and standards. And you could expect that on the one hand, this will be largely driven by the space agencies and the telecom regulators. But on the other hand, I think the private sector has a meaningful role to play there in terms of advocacy, in terms of bringing new ideas, publishing the white papers. I mean, what we're doing on Equitas, what you asked me in the beginning, what is the challenges, is how do we explain it? And how do we explain it not just to MNOs, but to policymakers? So not a long time ago, Mark visited the UAE, and we visited the space agency, and then we visited the telecom regulator. And it was an opportunity for us to explain why this made sense and how this addressed the sovereignty requirements of the UAE, et cetera, et cetera. And Mark and I had to sort of work with our policy-minded colleagues to be able to come up with this explanation. And I think the opportunity is going to be even more pronounced going forward. Even more so, although I don't want to, because this is a topic for a dedicated conversation. We talked about all of this while not referring to what AI will do to our domain, whether it's in the communication domain or to Earth observation. And I would be hard-pressed to think that we can have a coherent conversation and coherent executions when it comes to AI coming into space without proper policy guidance into it. So, yeah, I think whoever asked the question, I think should leave this conversation encouraged that he or she has a role to play.
I'm gonna end with, we've got just less than a minute left. I'm gonna end with one future-facing question, which is, from today's perspective, who is likely to establish and operate a solar system internet in the future, especially with respect to government, private, NGO sectors?
Well, right now, I can tell you what is going on is, because of all the interest in the moon, both NASA and European Space Agency have programs for communications relay from the moon to Earth for all kinds of purposes.
Lots of laser comms.
Right. Yep. So I think that the space agencies and interagency cooperation is going to be an important part of it, especially because the missions that are likely to use that are likely to be funded to some extent by those same agencies.
I agree with Mark. I think in the early innings, these cislunar systems will be largely driven by states, by the way, which is the history of the satellite communication industry. This is how we started, and then the private sector took the front seat. And I think this is what we're going to observe here. But yeah, we still have a long way to get there.
Yeah, well, with that said, I'm glad we were able to end on a future-facing question. I'd like to thank both of you, Mark and Karim, for just all your amazing knowledge here. Just a round of applause for these folks. And now I believe we are going to hand off to Tia. So.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tessa Blanc-Knowles. I serve as Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Technology Programs, or AC Tech, as we say. And I just want to extend a very sincere thanks to all of our panelists today for contributing time and expertise, and to the audience members, both those who joined us in person and online. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. As we've heard today, shaping the new space age isn't always going to be straightforward. And there is urgent need to align on regulation, prioritization, and strategy amidst a changing technological and geopolitical world order. And it's through conversations like those that we've had today that will shape the next months, years, and decades in the global space ecosystem. And it's through dialogues and convenings like this that the Atlantic Council is committed to fostering conversations on the most pressing topics in space, whether they're flashy or nerdy. There's work to be done on international coordination, technological advancement, commercial integration, and equitable access across the space ecosystem. None of that is easy, but all of it is necessary. And so our hope at the Atlantic Council is that we may remain persistent and hungry for that coordination and advancement for the ultimate betterment of society writ large. So let me just close the day with a special thank you to the Embassy of UAE here in Washington, D.C. For your partnership in today's program, as well as to the Geotech Center and Atlantic Council events team for their always excellent work in making events like this happen. And we hope to see you all back here at the Atlantic Council for future conversations on space. And I invite you to stay connected to the Geotech Center via LinkedIn and X at the handle @ACGeotech. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.